It's down to the last four teams, and BetOnline has been your tournament bracket headquarters all March long. MLB is here, and NBA and NHL playoffs are around the corner. BetOnline is the number one source for your summer sports wagering. Head to BetOnline today to stay updated on all the action. BetOnline, the game starts here.
Imagine earning a degree that prepares you with real skills for the real world. Capella University's programs teach skills relevant to your career so you can apply what you learn right away. Learn how Capella can make a difference in your life at capella.edu.
Welcome to the Media Roundtable special edition, and this edition certainly is special because what we're doing here is giving you a look inside, or a listen rather, to our Chief Audio Officer Summit that we just held in July. At this event, we hosted about 50 different marketers representing about 30% of the podcast industry and a large section of the audio industry broadly with radio and streaming. Everybody came together in LA, and we had what was a multi-day event in several parts. The primary event happened at Spotify, where we had panels and learning sessions and a lot of collaboration about where are we at as an industry, and as a marketer, how can you be more successful in your day-to-day practices? So we talked industry news, we talked strategies, and we talked tactics. And so what we're doing here on the podcast is taking our recording of that and presenting it here to you. It was well received, and a big piece of it was our keynote presentation, which is the state of audio advertising. State of audio advertising is a first of its kind report that we put out. There's a lot of news that comes out about audio and podcasts specifically. We know that. That's why we do a podcast about it. But you never really see a kind of a state of the union with information that's not just for the industry broadly, but really narrow casting to the end user, the marketer, the chief audio officer who's responsible for the success of their campaign. So what we're going to do today is play that for you. Additionally, you should know that on our website, we have dropped the State of Audio report for you to download as a guide. And if you're interested, I would go to oxfordroad.com right now. And actually, you can download it. And if you're going to listen to the live presentation, you might want to scroll along so you can see the visuals. Alternatively, we have the video posted on YouTube if you're listening today and you want to hear that. But I really think you're going to get a lot of value on this. Let me preview a little bit about what you're going to hear further, and then we'll just jump into it. So the state of audio advertising had a few contributors and parts. Like I said, it was at the Spotify Pod City campus where we made the presentation. And you're going to hear first from Stephen Abraham, president at Oxford Road, about the current state of audio based on news and numbers. Then you're going to hear a section that I contributed directly to on the current state of brand safety in audio, which is interesting because right when we presented this, there had just been a series of congressional hearings attacking the approach that's been taken historically across media, but using the GARM brand safety and suitability framework. And we talked specifically about the challenges that represents and proposed a new way to think about brand safety and suitability. Now, since that has happened, not only was there a lot going on with the congressional hearings and large brands being called to Washington to defend their practices, but you've also seen X suing the World Federation of Advertisers for GARM, which is really their creation. And further, they have actually shut GARM down since we did this presentation. So super relevant, relevant when you look at it relative to the timing of everything. We put this out there. Within 45 days, you actually see the entity dissolving that was really pushing these standards that the industry has been relying on. So you're going to hear a little bit about that. Then you're going to hear from Giles Martin, our head of strategy and insights at Oxford Road, on the current tools that marketers have available to them in the marketplace. And you'll be really surprised to hear how overwhelmed so many marketers are when they compare this channel to all the other channels that they might be managing. Then finally, you'll hear from Neal Lucey, who's no stranger to listeners of this program. He's our head of strategy and product, along with Miranda Romano, our SVP of media operations, and they're presenting transformational tactics. That's where we're not just talking theory, we're really talking brass tacks about if you're an end user in the purchasing of audio advertising, what are specific actions you can take in this marketplace, because it is a moving target as the marketplace evolves. So you're about to hear all of that here. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it helps you get a better return on investment, whether you're a brand or whether you're a marketer working with brands. We hope that this report, which we intend to put out annually, starting here and starting now, really gives you some practical guidance and makes the ecosystem a little bit more sustainable. So without any further preface, I'm really excited to present to you the state of audio. Where were we? All right, so I'm just going to frame the conversation a little bit. A lot of what you're going to hear today is based on trends and things that have happened in the business in the last 12 months. You'll see some themes and patterns. A lot of the messages we had last year are exactly the same as today, but there's somewhere we're going to go in reverse, and things are wildly different than they were 12 months ago. As we go through these themes, we just want to stay consistent and kind of pick up where we left off. So I'm just going to summarize kind of what the core observation was last year when it was this time in 2023 and we were talking about the state of the business. We had just entered what many people are calling the age of efficiency. Okay, so there has been a race. I think all of us in this room have been feeling that. We're all adapting to it. And I think we're all very much in the same place this year. People have not started to put their feet up just yet. It's pretty competitive out there. Everybody's busy. Everybody's moving around. I don't think competition has been like this maybe ever. And with all the changes in technology, I think the rate of change has only accelerated. There's a lot of new tools in the market. Some of those that we were touching on last year are things like brand safety, synthetic voices, programmatic, verification, AI's impact on the market. And the market is still organizing around these pressures. It's putting more pressure on all of us than ever before, but it's also unlocking new opportunities. And so we're going to share a lot about how you can leverage those. Let's talk about AI for a minute. Obviously, AI is great. The fewer keystrokes we have to use to get a job done, like who doesn't want to do less typing and push less buttons and think about less things? I know our business is really benefiting from it. Production is completely changing in virtually every industry. There's a lot of things where I think we're just scratching the surface, but we know that it's creating major efficiencies that make our lives and our jobs a little bit better and a little bit smarter. But some of it's a little bit concerning as we hear the machines marching toward us, and we start to ask ourselves, what is our place in an artificial world? What if everything that makes us efficient may also be moving us away from the things that matter most? And perhaps in this environment, the most valuable currency is actually trust. In audio, I think the tie that binds us is our shared appreciation for the value established between a host and their audience when that host is imputed onto a brand. That's what makes this powerful. But what happens to a campaign when you can no longer leverage the deep personal connection that a communicator has with their audience on behalf of your brand? What happens when it all becomes just another digital transaction? And what do we lose if audio is no longer about trust and it's only about efficiency? I said it last year and I'll repeat it here today. My wish is that we not accidentally create a world where we're just playing a video game and trafficking audio ads like display banners. And that magic moment in audio when we realize that the maximum value and maximum trust really just disappears. The day this stops being a relationship business is the day that we've killed the golden goose. And I think many of you know that, and that's why in this room, you over-index on the personal endorsements because you know how powerful it is to be connected to real people. That's why we say save the live reads so often when we get a chance to be on a stage. We're at a fork in the road, and one prioritizes the relationship-driven part of the business, which is wildly inefficient. Onboarding calls are inefficient. Listening to the way that the host delivered your ad and worrying about that is inefficient. And you have to decide, am I going to move toward the artificial versions of this channel, or am I going to stay with the inefficient relationship-driven? The punchline, since we're now at the next year, is that we believe it's a both and as the answer. You need both. And artificial clearly has the momentum. I think that's where a lot of the conversation is in really every industry. Everything's about tech, new platforms, new tools. And these are great things. These are very important. But we need to protect the voices that are inefficient because there's so much power in that. Some of the things we're doing here is just, like I said, it's all about tactics. It's all about how does this grow your business. And if that's all you want out of this day, that's fine. You are welcome here. You're welcome to just go, okay, what does this mean for the decisions I have to make tomorrow? You'll walk out of here with that. But for those of us that want to be a part of something a little bit bigger and think that the work that we're doing in this industry is important, we also can collectively decide things. You're going to hear new ideas presented today that if the people in this room rallied behind it, if 30% of the market and the 30% that cares enough to get on airplanes and go spend a day of their time in a room like this, you know, what that can unlock is extraordinary. And so we invite you to work toward helping preserve the ecosystem that first attracted us to audio. What is the state of audio advertising? It's under construction. We are presenting a first-of-its-kind report, as I mentioned. We've got 3 parts. We used to always talk about the Wild West of podcast, right? And I think we have to acknowledge we're not really in a Wild West phase anymore. It's more of a boom town. And the industry's going through a remodel, but I feel like you guys are the ones paying for it. You should, the cement is wet and it is still coming together, but you guys should be able to put your name in it. You should at least be able to get a review on the design plans. So that's our focus on of the day, is to look at the ways that it's under construction. And our focus is really, I think this quote is important, where there is mystery, there is margin. It's a 44-year-old quote now, but it's the margin that keeps revenue lower in this business than it should be. Relative to the time that people spend with it. And the better you understand those mysteries, the better you can leverage it as an opportunity that other brands cannot. And so, you know, you're going to see our liabilities also being our greatest strengths, and we're going to solve this together. And so with that, may I introduce to you our president and my friend, Stephen Abraham, to give you the state of audio advertising.
Thank you very much. Hey. And as Dan said, I'm going to spend the next sort of 20 minutes or so talking to you about where we see the state of audio at the moment. And the purpose for that is really, a lot of it I think you're already going to know, but it's some perspectives from us as an agency on where we think the business is today, where it's come from, and where we think it's going to go. The state of audio. Before we even get into that, I think being able to understand the state of audio is really reminiscent in the kind of content that we see every single day. I don't know about all of you, but for those of us that work heavily in the audio industry or in agencies or at publishers, we receive a wealth of information every single day. I mean, the word count, the amount of noise that's being talked about in the audio industry is phenomenal. My past was always in omni-channel agencies, working across all different platforms. And I can safely say that I'd never received as much noise as I do about all of those other channels as I do with regards to audio. And I think this speaks volumes, literally, excuse the pun, to the importance of what's going on in this category at the moment. So when Dan talked about under construction, I was thinking about that for quite a while. I'm sure you guys are thinking, what do you mean under construction? Radio advertising's been around since the 1920s. We've been able to commercially talk to people and sell them products for over 100 years. What we mean by by that is a number of different areas that are under construction. It's being built as we actually live the industry. And what we mean by that is it's under construction with regards to where the consumer is receiving their messages, the amount of time they're listening between different platforms. I mean, for the first time last year, we saw digital platform channels overtake the traditional. With regards to creative, how we think about talking to them from a messaging perspective. Do we continue down the produce route, or are we looking at personal endorsements or hosts? All of those questions that you guys have to think about when you're crafting your different messages. The trading marketplace that we're in at the moment. Our hosts themselves in the past few months have released their own self-serve platform that we know we're all talking about at the moment. Programmatic is gaining speed. Much more in streaming as it is in podcast because of the way podcast is delivered and because of that personal relationship. But it's taking a life of its own at the moment, and it's taking a lot of cues from the digital world. Talent, the amount of deals that we've seen going in the last 12 months after a bit of a lull at the end of 22 and 2023 is taking place again. All of those deals that are changing and the revised distribution through non-exclusives, etc., are going to trickle down to your marketing dollars, and it's going to have impact on how you think about deploying your dollars. Measurement, we're going to get into that today in depth with Giles' panel. Pixels, no pixels, multiple pixels, putting surveys together. How you actually put together or stitch together your best measurement program is something we're going to spend some time talking about today and try to solve together over the course of time. And brand safety, an extremely important aspect. Dan's going to get heavily into that. But we want to talk about being brand safe is one thing, but not restricting yourselves from certain shows. This is really important. How do you use the tools to their optimum use so that you can actually get the best out of them without restricting yourself? So with that, yes, it's under construction, but it's also in constant evolution. And let's just dwell a little bit on some of the recent changes that we've seen in the business. I mean, for those of us that have been around working in podcasts, it's not all new. You've heard about these things. But obviously one of the biggest changes took place last year with the release of iOS 17 in September. I mean, this was a massive issue. I'm not going to pretend I know all about how the pipes and tubes changed all this, but we saw a 20%, or they saw a 20% reduction in the downloads on Apple devices. Look, it didn't really make a huge difference with regards to listening. It was a revised way on how we think about measuring. But I think the really important aspect, and one thing that maybe has been slightly missed, is if, a $2 billion business in the US can then agitate what is a $3.4 trillion valued company to actually making a change, it speaks volumes to the amount of importance that's being given to podcast. And shout out to Pete and a couple of other folks in this room who I know were involved in that. Some clients as well, I think Brittany and Brian at Sounds Profitable. This is really important. Our voices were heard. I think this is a really important aspect that we should consider. Carrie touched on it before, the importance of video in podcast is taking obviously leaps forward with regards to how we think about, again, deploying those dollars. Here's just a few stats with regards to that. 79% of podcast consumers have listened to a podcast that has video. Twice the amount of people agree that a podcast is a video recording that they can watch on an app. 31% weekly podcast listeners are going through, obviously YouTube. Clearly the brand awareness of YouTube is way more than any other platform, but I think it speaks volumes to what people are looking for. And 44% versus 35% in terms of renewal rates for podcasts with video simulcasts. This gives us huge amount of opportunity in the changes when you think about how you can integrate that with just your pure audio programs. It gives you increased reach, and it extends the integrations of all the audio programs that you're doing. So finally, we can also get over one of those obstacles that many people talk about with audio, which is it's not visual. It's a very singular sense medium. This is a way that we can really think about extending that message and build out complete audio and visual programs. The talent deals. So obviously there's been a lot of change, a lot more money is coming back into the market. I mean, just a few that we've seen in the past year. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the amount of musical chairs that's taking place with regards to the big talent is phenomenal at the moment. It really is a seller's market. Again, this is going to impact and trickle down to issues that could be concerning with regards to how we think about pricing in the marketplace. Another thing, that phenomenon that we're seeing, which is the complete opposite, which is where a lot of marketeers can get around the heavy pricing that a lot of the marquee shows are now charging because of the influx of big brand dollars, is quite the opposite, the rise of the superfan. Forgive me, I'm a soccer nut, as you would say here, so I'm just going to use this example. One way that you can think about getting extended 1+ reach is to stitch together networks of fan-type podcasts, right? These are all a bunch of Premier League show, teams. I'm sure some of you listen to them. Most of the fans will only be listening to this one show at any given time. But the beauty about these kind of podcasts that you can integrate into your programs is we call them perishable. They're not just sitting on your phone or sitting on any device that you have and you go to when you want. If you don't listen to them in that moment, it's not worth it. So you can really build out and start to build out frequency at a given time. So this is another way that you can think about extending those dollars when you're challenged with the marquee shows. So obviously more options for more access, broader reach, and opportunities. And finally, look, we've been talking about it a lot. A couple of us talked about it yesterday evening on the panels. The amount of interest and explosion that's going on with regards to international is breathtaking. I mean, for those, there was a few of us in this room, some from Oxford Road, that were at the London podcast show. And I got to say, it was one of the most exciting conferences. No disrespect to all our colleagues at Podcast Movement, which is a wonderful show here as well. But I've got to say, the interest and the excitement with regards to new content creators and new publishers coming into the market was palpable. It was a really great show. So those are some of the things we should look at. And just to underline that point, international is growing, but I want to talk a little bit about the volume of dollars, because whilst we have 100 million listeners that we can reach per week within podcast, and we have about a $4 billion business globally at the moment, there's about 500 million in the rest of the world. Now, in the US, that's about 30% of the population. When you think about it from a worldwide perspective, with the rest of the 6.4 billion humans that live on the planet, it's about 5%. So it's growing massively in terms of content, but the dollars are going to come over time. What that means for you guys is that there's a real opportunity in international. If you have business outside of the US, you can get a lot for your dollars. CPMs are high, we know that at the moment, but ad load is very low, but it's going to change. You can get into those markets for relatively low entry pricing. So there's a lot of opportunity in international. And everything here is in service of the audience. The root of the very word audio and audience comes from to hear. So in many ways, this is the very first sort of medium. But what it makes me ask also is, in current days, the audiences are in control. They have more access, more content, and more listening. By 2024, we expect that people's daily lives are going to be using media almost 776 minutes out of the time during the day. Audio is going to hold its own. We think it's still going to stay around 20%, largely driven by the massive growth in podcasts, which in just the last 9 years we've seen double. So it begs the question, as Dan sort of talked about before, why does audio get such a small slice? And I want to dive into it a bit because, whilst you guys are already ahead of the game, you're in Fight Club, you already spend probably a disproportionate amount of your dollars versus everybody else. You spend a very healthy amount. It's certainly not 5%, as we've seen at the beginning. But it's not for everybody. It doesn't really stack up, and we want to explore that. At the moment, we believe the medium really is undervalued. So let's look at some of the reasons why we think. And just to put some numbers to that, the US is going to be approximately $390 billion in terms of all advertising. And as Dan has said, and as we've shown up here, audio is just under $18 billion of that, so about 4.5%. By 2030, we believe the entire market is going to be about 540. And I say we believe, it depends which researcher you're looking at, but most of the research would indicate towards that number. It's almost a 40% increase. Audio is going to stay relatively flat within that. And the reasons are numerous, but one of the ones is purely because of the cannibalization within the overall industry. Old media or old radio is losing dollars quickly to the on-demand streaming and podcast platforms. That's going to continue. It's going to take a few years before we see the rise, but that's where the cannibalization is taking place. Fragmentation. For 4.5% of all spend, there's a lot of players out there. There's a lot of competition that you can go to. There's a lot of great deals to be had for marketers. Highly competitive. Strangely enough, for an emerging market and for a platform that's exploding, we're actually beginning to see a bit of a slowdown in the number of shows that are coming out. So that's also contributing to this factor. And finally, and this may be a potential scenario that we could see over the next few years, the shift from ad-funded models to subscription. I mean, if you just look or take a dive into how 18 to 34-year-olds in the US are currently consuming, only 60% of their time is in ad-funded. So if you want to use that as a portent towards the future, we probably will see a scenario whereby in the next 4 or 5 years, only 60% of all industry inventory across on-demand platforms is going to be available to purchase. What does that mean for you guys? Well, the potential implications are numerous, but firstly, if there's going to be a reduced supply in digital audio inventory and commercial listening, there's a potential that we could see price increases and increased CPMs over the next few years. Now, when I say clutter, I've just told you that inventory was reducing, but what we think potentially could happen there is there'll be the same minutage, but many publishers, many media owners are going to want to be able to reclaw those dollars back. So they're going to start filtering out the minutage and be selling to more advertisers. So we'll see a lot more messages in the shows, and they could be charging premiums for those. On the flip side, however, because radio is going to be losing more of those dollars, there are deals to be had. At the moment, we kind of liken it kind of radio's on the dip. It's going on the down. You can get some really good deals in the marketplace. So those are some of the implications of what we see over the next few years happening with regards to the slice of the pie that audio has. There's still we can still find margin in this mystery, though, and most of today is going to be talking about that. I just want to dwell on a few of the big points and how we can maybe solve some of those challenges that we're seeing. Finding solutions. So we have the challenges on this side and a quick one-line point on how we think you can address those, which again, we're going to go into more depth throughout the course of the day. Targeting limitations. As measurement and as tools improve, we're going to be able to feed in more granular data sets. This is going to allow us to tease out more and more insights and hopefully make even more meaningful understanding around where the targets are listening and how we can build those into our plans. Market fragmentation. Dan's going to talk more about this in the brand safety space, but if we use the tools properly, it's going to open up other kinds of shows that we can get to, as we talked about in terms of the rise of the Uber fan. So we will be able to create more of a monetized situation within that long tail. We won't be restricted to just certain shows that show up within the individual brand safety tool reports. Creative constraints. Look, we've talked a little bit about it before, the limitations that the media has, because supposedly it's, a lot of marketeers don't even think about it because it's not visual. That's a bit of a myth, to be honest, because when we're actually listening to audio, we're more in tune with what's going on, so our senses are actually more heightened. So host reads and host endorsements are even more potent and more powerful if we can get that right. And obviously with the advent of simulcast, we can get that visual cue as well. Stopping them from skipping, this is a problem for all platforms, but I think we in the industry also need to come together and talk to our publisher partners and make sure that we're stringent and self-checking ourselves to not have ads that become detrimental to the experience and really sort of disruptive versus actually being meaningful within those environments. Measurement and attribution. There are new players and tools coming into the market. I want to quote what Brittany said last night on her panel, where she said, work with an agency. You can work with your agencies to really find that sweet spot, getting the right sort of tools together to understand how you can really understand how your dollars are attributing in the most meaningful way. Finally, did you get what you paid for? Obviously, there's going to have to be even more input into the market with regards to the verification of impressions, the frequency, and the blocking. These are other areas that we need to explore today to understand how they can be improved. And finally, within this part, I want to say play to the platform strength. Whilst Oxford is a media agency purely focused on audio opportunities, we're not oblivious to the fact that the way audio works best is when it's connected with everything else you're doing. So understanding how those dots are working, how you're connecting those dots into those other platforms is extremely important. So if we get it right, as we said, audio can be very hard, but there's huge potential and untapped potential still within the platform. So looking a little bit to tomorrow before I wrap up, many of these things we've already touched on, but automation, and I call it, I really don't like the word artificial. I know we say artificial intelligence, but it's a really negative word. I like augmentation. I think it's far more representative of what that is. So automation and augmentation. We've seen the rise of self-serve platforms. That's going to continue. Programmatic is going to extend more. Personalized audio opportunities, I think they're going to come far more to the forefront as the technology permits. One of the ways is also we're going to be able to test at scale, which I think is a hugely advantageous area that we need to explore more. And look, we talk about spatial audio. We hear about all the technologies in the marketplace. I wonder how many of us are actually optimizing and using that. It's not cost prohibitive to put into your ads. So using the advantages of all the tech and hardware that's out there, or I should say software that allows those experiences, is definitely something we should continue to explore. International, I've spoken about that. Huge opportunities. France, Italy, Germany, not so much Spain. I don't really want you to send a lot of money to those guys at the moment after last weekend. But, France, Italy, and Germany, and the FIGS marketplaces, and even further, there's huge amounts of content creation being made at the moment. But as I said, the dollars are not yet there. I mean, you can get into a market like Italy, which is almost 25% of the US population, and the entry price is a fraction of what's going on here. I think the entire podcast market spend last year, if you think here it's 2 billion, was just under 30 million. So when you put it in that context, it's a really exploding market. And finally, we briefly touched on this, the value of trust. That's not going to change. The audio market is going to continue there. It's a very trusted and credible medium. And I think this quote that says it at the end, trusted media creates more trust in the ads. And I just want to underline that. It's a really important factor. So we're closer than we think with these areas. So to just recap this section before I hand over to the first panel, adaptation is a necessity, being nimble and flexible when you put your plans together. I don't need to tell you, you're experienced marketeers, but that's the way we need to think about it, specifically with how we stitch it together with other platforms. Automation should be our frenemy. Use it in the right way. We need to continue to be authentic in the messages we give. You all know that. But how can automation improve a lot of the left side of the brain areas that we're doing in our plans? To the point, authenticity still needs to be the North Star. It's exactly what we should be doing. A lot of the reasons why people tune in to these medias is because people like listening to people at the end of the day. They might not like listening to me, but people like going on to these podcasts and listening to conversation and being engaged. So I think it behooves us for the messages that we put out there need to be as equally authentic as the conversations that are taking place. Global is definitely a key opportunity. Again, I've said that before and you all know that. Brand safe, but I want to underline this and we'll get more into it, not brand restrictive. I think this is a really important point and we'll dive into that after. And finally, I just want to finish by saying audio is not a silo. We're talking about audio specifically today and it's very important and it's a big slug of your marketing dollars, but how you combine that and how you connect it in everything else so the whole is greater than the sum of the parts is really, really important.
This is a subject that is very near to my heart. Brand safety, I've been working on this one for a while. Our whole team has for about the last 4 years. In May, I don't know if any of you were there, but there was the IAB podcast upfronts in New York. I delivered a bit of an intervention to the industry, and I want to share some of what I presented there with you guys and a few other new pieces of information. But it's very important. It also directly ties in with one of our sponsors for this whole event, Seeker, who's been a great partner for us. Like I said, this is an important issue to me. I think the implications are massive. They're massive for brands. They're massive for shows and publishers. But I think they have impact on democracy. I think there's real implications with this one. And as I shared last night, I believe that audio is the greatest canvas in media for the free and open exchange of ideas. And podcasting has a bit of a challenge because, specifically podcasting, because it's still user-generated content and there's really no FCC oversight. There isn't any official governance on it, so there are no rules. And as a brand and as a buyer, you don't really have the option to just filter out everything that's been kind of pre-vetted by networks. And even if it is, some networks carry some stuff that's a little risky. And so brands, the content that is created in audio can be harmful. I think we know that. Words have consequences, words have meaning, and they can have real life implications. Advertising is the fuel of audio. The modern origins of, actually, I'm going to go back for a minute. Pardon me. So if we can just scroll down a little bit. Brand suitability is one of the words that gets thrown out around, and I just want to say something about that. If you ask 10 different people, if everybody at your table wrote down what is brand suitability, you'd probably get 10 different answers, okay? But the way I think about it, just to define terms, I see it as brand safety is the brakes, and brand suitability is the gas. That's what makes you want to go toward content. And the goal for brand safety is very good. We're going to focus on the safety aspect here. It's an important goal to make sure the brands don't show up in environments that are hateful or profane or needlessly provocative. So just a bottom line, the state of brand safety and suitability in audio, it is broken. It is deeply, fundamentally broken. Solutions have been adopted. We've helped create solutions in this space. But in practice, what's been happening is that it arbitrarily and extensively excludes entire genres of content. We talked about this last night: news, society and culture, comedy, true crime. It's hurting a lot of groups, and that's advertisers like yourselves who get limited in your reach and your performance because of so many environments that you can't go into. It's also creators and publishers that get unnecessarily defunded based on guilt by association because of a few bad actors. Listeners miss out on critical information that helps them form their perspectives on the world and voices that they just don't get to hear because it's not always a good commercial venture. And democracy, which, in my view, needs healthy discourse and civil discourse on some of the most complex issues. The more sticky an issue is, the more we probably need to talk about it. So the problem with brand safety is it shuts all that down. Okay, so let's talk about how we got here. In my view, this all kicked off in 2020. Nobody was saying the word brand safety and suitability in audio in 2018. Okay, but I think a confluence of events happened. Some guy with the last name Trump, there was a pandemic, I heard, and after the murder of George Floyd, I think people really just didn't know how to make decisions in the advertising community. We had a lot of struggles to know, what is safe? What are the environments that our brands are going to be protected in? And every topic became a political football with both sides claiming moral superiority over the issue. People stopped agreeing on facts. Both sides of the political spectrum, because that's what so much of this is, started really giving the loudest voice the microphone, and extremist views really started to carry the conversation. And look, sometimes talent does dumb things. Sometimes they say dumb things outside of their show, and you're also held responsible for that to some extent as a marketer. You'll know you've been called to the principal's office because there was a problem with something somebody did in the past or the recent past. But you have a lot of pressure on you to avoid these types of situations. When we saw this happen in 2020, we ran at the problem. We started our podcast, which is called the Media Roundtable. For 2 years, the only thing that we did was use the podcast as a platform to have a bit of a laboratory, to have an open discussion about this problem and seek ways to solve it. So we had people from all kinds of different walks of life that came on and shared their views with us. We had politicians, we had Washington bureau chief for CNN, we had lots of podcasters, executives, brand safety people that work for GARM and the 4As, and we just tried to get all the perspectives that we could. So here's what happened. We came to the conclusion that we needed nutrition labels on media and specifically in audio because none existed. There were really no tools, and so it was all very arbitrary opinions going safe, not safe, buy, do not buy. But we needed more information about the content that we're consuming and the content that we're pushing out into the world. And Oxford Road has, just full disclosure, I feel like I need to disclaim this, we've had partnerships, we've made strategic investments in a number of companies that are somehow involved in this business. Adfontes, Barometer, Podscribe has a tool. We have been in partnership with Seeker because I think this is such a critical issue and we just haven't had tools that are very useful. A lot of people jumped into this a couple of years ago, and we kind of landed on that we would use the GARM framework for brand safety and suitability. Now, if you haven't ever heard about this before, so the World Federation of Advertisers, which represents like 90% of the spend in media, got together and decided they were going to have like 11 categories of risk. And there were going to be very precise definitions of those categories. And then there were going to be definitions of 4 levels of each of these. And then you as a brand are supposed to look at that list and then go, what's my tolerance level? Am I medium on terrorism and low on violence? Like, you're supposed to make decisions on all these things and then be held accountable for that, which is totally theoretical because you don't even really know what the shows that you're buying even are necessarily. It gets worse. This is from last week, okay? We had Rob Rakowitz, top right, he runs GARM. He was on our podcast when they were earlier in the launch. He was called before Congress. There's now federal scrutiny. The House Judiciary Committee, under the guise of antitrust enforcement, called in Mars, P&G, Unilever, Group M, Diageo. There's a lot of pressure on these people because what they basically said was your GARM framework that's become the industry norm, okay, is actually picking on conservatives. That was the argument that Congress was making. I'm going to give you my point of view. I don't think that's actually accurate. I think that GARM screws everybody. I think that, and by the way, I just want to say something. I thought it was going to work. Like, I was one of the advocates saying we need brand safety tools to measure this. It's a great framework on paper, but when you put it into practice, it doesn't really play. I'm going to show you what I mean. So if you are a marketer and you're in a platform and you say, here's my risk tolerance on any of the GARM standards. If you have a risk tolerance that is above low for anything, you're ineligible from some very safe content. Apologies, Ashley, you're up there too. But basically, these are unsponsorable shows because the definitions are too broad. And they leave advertisers from, like I said, guilt by association, keywords that you might use in your show. Trump, death, shoot, Biden, Israel. These things, you know, every brand safety tool will tell you that, oh no, we're using context and AI is great, and it is, but it's not great enough to catch this stuff. And so what's happening is shows are being ruled out on plans before they even see the light of day. And it's really causing a lot of problems. And if you're a media buyer or if you're a chief audio officer, you have stakeholders you have to report to. You know, there may be multiple layers of management between the CEO of a brand and the person who makes the end decision on what shows get purchased, and you're trying to do that on your own behalf. How are you going to have a risk tolerance that's any higher than low and feel responsible in what you're doing? So it's a very difficult position that you're put in when you use this framework. We need more precise tools. So we partnered with Seeker a year ago. We introduced the civility score, okay? And we're very grateful to Seeker because this is what we asked them to build, and they actually did it. Civility score measures one metric: personal attack in content. It can be against an individual. It can be a personal attack against a group of individuals. And there's extra weighting if the attack is against a protected class of people. The golden rule is really the metric that we're proposing here. And a brand safe environment probably has two metrics. And civility, we believe, should be the dominant one. The second one is profanity, which I think GARM can do. I think that most tools can do. If you need something to find how many swear words are in your podcast, or you know, whatever the words you don't like are or don't want to be associated with, that can be done. And I think, you know, foul language doesn't have the same impact that it used to. I think the meanings change and the importance of that changes. But a lot of brands still need that. And if you have those two metrics, you don't need the 11, is my point of view. And so advertisers should be able to know when they go into a show how much this person is personally attacking somebody else, because here's what happens. The reason you get a phone call or the reason your brand is trending on Twitter for the wrong reasons is because it's because of the culture wars, and it's usually because somebody that you sponsored threw a rock at somebody else. They attacked, they tried to harm somebody else with their words. And usually there's a counterattack that happens from that. And what happens is the brand gets stuck in the crossfire. So truly, audiences and most folks are pretty okay with civil discussion and people having different ideas about stuff. That's usually not the problem. The problem is when it becomes hateful. And that's what we've really, we asked Seeker to do it, and they were able to do it, and the results are very accurate. So you can see here, all of these shows that we showed you earlier, unsponsorable. If you have a low risk tolerance in all these categories, but if you use civility score, they all look great because they are great, and they should be. So that's where we're at today. We have a gold standard for it. It's confusing because I don't want to be I don't want to be pushing our sponsors so hard, but in reality, they're the ones that built it, and we haven't been able to make use of the others. So if you have a chance to demo it, you'll see the accuracy and the transparency of the interface. The other thing I want to say is this: if you're using another tool, I talk to a lot of brands, I talk to a lot of people, and I say, what are you doing for brand safety and suitability? They're like, oh, we're using this platform and that platform. My question is always the same. Do you look at the transcripts? Because if you look at the transcripts of the shows, you should be able to see what's getting flagged for what reasons. And when you use the GARM framework, it is so wildly inaccurate, it is so error-prone, that it doesn't matter what your point of view is. You're using the wrong keywords, it gets picked up, misunderstood, and it gets wiped out. So if you are using something, whatever it is, please look at the transcripts and see if it's something that you really can trust. Okay, I'm going to show you a quick case study on why this is important for your business. We took the Edison Top 50 podcasts and we said, all right, if you have a low risk tolerance using GARM, how many shows are eligible for you? We found that 34% of the top 50 shows, which is probably about 80% of the reach of the whole industry, actually would pass. If you use civility score and you say, we don't want to touch anything below an 80, which is pretty good, you would be able to double that number. 69% of podcasts would be eligible for you. So it's a valuable metric, and it allows you to double the reach of your program. So just to recap really quickly, one, the culture wars require solutions, okay? It's kind of thrust us all into this. We can't really get around it. Two, brand safety is broken. Three, civility and profanity are enough to get the job done. And four, nutrition labels are needed. So with that, that's my 10 minutes, and please welcome Giles Martin to explain the other 7,000 tools in the market.
Thank you, Dan. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Giles Martin, and the question today, how many tools does it take to measure an audio campaign? We will find the answer. So you've probably all seen versions of this before. I think the original LumaScape was sometime around 2010. There's now a Podscape, in case you haven't seen it. As with all the LumaScapes, it's pretty overwhelming. The part that we're interested in today is the part at the bottom, where most of the tools that we're interested in can be found. They have broken it in the Podscape into these categories: download, metrics and rankers, attribution, brand lift, etc., etc. It's still quite a lot to wrangle, as you can see. So we are going to organize it in a slightly different way, the way we might as campaign or media planners. So we're going to look at tools for the pre-campaign, during the campaign, and post-campaign. And pre-campaign, we have research, planning and buying tools. We have creative tools. This is a fast-growing part of the industry, given the massive language model development. And then during the campaign, we're mostly looking at attribution tools. We're going to talk about attribution in a panel immediately after this. So this is just a little amuse-bouche on attribution for you all. And then reconciliation, obviously very, very important. Earlier, we were talking about the change in downloads due to iOS 17. So these are all important matters for us all. So pre-campaign. We've kept the categories from the Podscape, downloads and rankers: competitive intelligence, brand safety, and other data sources. I don't know how much you all are using the sort of publicly available charts. It's a bit of a mixed bag in there. I think the key thing to be aware of with these charts is some of them are subsets of the whole market. So the Triton charts, for example, just show the shows that are hosted on Triton. The PodTrack charts are opt-in only. So you do need to be careful when you're looking at these rankers, but they can all be helpful. Your best bet, really, and I would say this, but is your friendly local podcast agency or audio agency that has a large database that not only will have all the shows in it, will have the performance data as well. Competitive intelligence, this breaks down into really sort of podcast specific, which here we're looking at Veritonic and Magellan. I know that's a feature of PodScribe as well now. These are both industry standard tools at this point. If you want to see what other brands are spending in the market, the spend estimates, as you might expect, are a little bit approximate, to put it kindly. So best to try and merge that insight with your own pricing, if you can, to get a better read on spend. And then Vivix and Media Radar, now the same company, in fact, there's all the data on multi-channel spending and also creative insights as well. So I know we've talked about whether you're managing audio in a silo, like as its own channel, or whether you're looking at it more broadly as part of a marketing and channel strategy. If you're looking at it more broadly, these tools like Vivix are pretty essential to understand what competitors are doing across all the channels. We've talked a lot about brand safety. We're big fans of what Seeker are doing. I won't say more about that now. Other data sources, we talked about PodScribe, Podchaser, and Raphonic. These are all new breeds of tools that are, I think what's most interesting about them is they're starting to showcase audience profiles when you look against each show, so you can see demographics and professional information perhaps, and financial information. I'm a little bit skeptical about some of the third-party data that's available in the market, so you might want to treat those with a little caution. We don't always see those audience profiles correlate with performance. But it is interesting and helpful info to have. I think the one other call out here is Statista, which has been very, very useful for us when we've been looking at international campaigns. And it's useful generally, but particularly helpful there. So let's look at creative tools. As I said, there have been a lot of changes in this space. I think the sort of first things to know about are the first three, AdThos, Spec AI, and Wondercraft. I don't know if you're familiar with any of those. One thing that's interesting about Wondercraft to me is they have a fully AI recap of the top 10 stories on Hacker News from Y Combinator. I don't know if anyone reads Hacker News. I've always wanted to. I never get to it, but now there's an AI summary of the top 10 stories read by AI, summarized by AI from Wondercraft. But they also, along with AdThos and Spec AI, it's a sort of creative in a box, if you will. You can put in a brief using a sort of ChatGPT type interface, say, write me a script for, millennials for beauty products, and they will churn out a script to your specifications. You can add voices of your own choice, you can add music of your own choice, and this is really a new generation of tools. Clearly, it needs human oversight still. You can't just set it and forget it, but definitely things to be watching, and really, really interesting space. Wondercraft is probably the one that we like the most right now. 11 Labs and Well Said Labs and Respeecher, they're part of a category of tools that are working with synthetic voices. So for advertisers, particularly if you're using promo codes or vanities, this can be a really, really helpful tool. If you have a spokesperson or maybe a CAO show up in a voiceover booth, read the ad, and it was a miracle to get half an hour of their time, and then it turns out later you need to change the offer, or you've got new vanity URLs. These guys can take a print of that voice and churn out 100 different vanity URLs read in that person's voice. So these can be very, very helpful tools for sort of tactical aspects of your campaign. None of these tools are a one-stop shop, but used with precision, they can be extremely valuable. And Respeecher, as I alluded to, it's the same type of tool, but my understanding is it's a sort of next level up. They do a lot of work for movie studios, for example, and instead of needing just a 3-minute sample of a voice, they need 6 hours of voice sample, like read in specific ways and with certain sonic cues as well. So A quick mention of the others. Suno is AI music generator. I think we're generally seeing most music is still picked from libraries. So that's probably another year away. We'll report back on that next year. A Million Ads is doing dynamic creative. They were one of the earliest in the market to do that. I think they've still got an interesting product. There's clearly other ways to do that now as well. And Veritonic, some of our clients like to use them for pre-testing of campaigns to validate creatives before we go to market. So that can also be helpful for the right kind of advertisers. And then mid-campaign, I mentioned this is mostly attribution. These are mostly pixel measurement companies, with the exception of Fairing. Fairing is actually a plug-in to Shopify. So if your site is hosted on Shopify, you can use Fairing to set up a survey very quickly. How did you hear about our survey? So that's very easy to get up and running, and we like that a lot. YouGov, as you may well know, is a very well-established and trusted research company. One of the nice things about them is they're in market every single day, so they're collecting data on a daily basis, hence potentially being helpful mid-campaign. And if you are going to run MMMs or other models later on, capturing that daily sort of brand perception data, and are people hearing your ads? Are they aware of your ads? Are they aware of your brand? That type of data from YouGov, on a daily basis can be very helpful to fund those, to fuel those models as well. Not going to go into this in a lot of detail now, but these are some of the main players in the attribution space, the pixel attribution space specifically. We work mostly with Spotify Ad Analytics or Podscribe or Claritas. There are important questions to ask about how these companies do what they do, and that's what this slide is really designed to illustrate. Again, particularly as we have been exploring more and more international buys, we're seeing more and more IPv6 traffic in certain countries, for example, and that raised a bunch of questions about what type of IP data companies were bringing in, both on the ad serving side and from the client side. So there's a lot to digest here. My bosses are always asking me, which is the right partner? And I always give them a somewhat frustrating answer, which is it does depend. And Claritas is a very well-trusted brand. You probably are all familiar with them. They've been doing data and analytics for at least 50 years. Podscribe, but they don't do international, for example. Podscribe has got a great dashboard, very, very flexible, lots of great features about their attribution product. And SPA is currently at no cost still to advertisers. So if that's of interest to you, that obviously could make it a priority. So finally, post-campaign, I think for reconciliation and ratings, Podscribe is the most important to us. We've talked a bit about that. We'll talk more about them later on, but they've got a great tool showing were your ads read correctly, were they in the right place in the podcast, if you booked a pre, did you get a pre, etc. Are there competitive ads showing up in there? All of these things are things you want to obviously hold your media partners accountable for, and this is a great tool to surface all of that information in the podcast space. If you're looking at the full funnel, we really like Edison Research and Signal Hill. They're both audio specialists for brand measurement. Brand safety also applies in a reconciliation context. And then MMM, this is a whole separate conversation, but I think what's interesting to call out here is these sort of three families of MMM type approaches now. You have these sort of out-of-the-box open source things. The Profit is the Facebook one. There's the Google have an out-of-the-box MMM as well on GitHub. And then you have the big sort of traditional MMM heavy lifters who are going to charge you quite a lot of money. And then you've got this sort of new generation of tools, sort of software as a service MMM, Recast Key, Northbeam. Some of our clients are working with them. I haven't had that much exposure to them, but they're definitely getting traction. So that's something to watch as well. So in summary, these are the tools that we really like. I didn't talk much about ComsPoint. That's for cross-channel strategy. Very, very helpful. And then the Oxford Road database, obviously, is your best source of research. MRI Simmons, I think I covered all of these. So there's obviously a lot to this. There are a lot of tools that we don't use. If you guys are using other tools that I haven't mentioned today, I would love to hear about it. I'd love to hear if you trust them, if you like them. So let's please keep that conversation open.
All right. So this is a section. I think I've seen people taking notes, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
But this might be the section where you want to have pen and paper out, just in case.
Yep.
So our aim with this section is to really arm you with tactics that you can take back and apply to your plans, not next year, but starting next week. The first thing we're going to start with is just a profile of the audio channels. This is the most numbers you're going to see since probably Giles and Pete did their last section. But how many people guessed 49 for terrestrial radio? I see one, I see two. All right, so podcasts are the youngest. Median age of the US adult audience is 48. Podcast is about 10 years younger than that. Streaming is the next youngest at 42. Terrestrial radio, believe it or not, is basically on average. What isn't on average in terrestrial radio is AM radio. AM radio, the average age is 60. So if you're thinking older, you might have been thinking about AM radio. And then SXM radio is also older, but there's one really nice component about SXM. So on a median household income basis, the two most affluent audio channels are podcasts and SXM. The US average median household income is $85K, so they're quite well above average. Terrestrial radio is a tiny bit below, and then digital radio and streaming are a bit above average as well. And then we get to the percentage that listen. So 47% listen to podcasts on a monthly basis, 90% listen to terrestrial radio on a monthly basis. Sirius XM's around 17%, and digital radio and streaming is 76%. I do want to myth bust. Just because it says 90% of people listen to terrestrial radio, you can't reach that many people with your advertising buy. So reach tops out about 60%, tops out lower than that for podcasts, obviously. And with terrestrial radio, it would take you about $50 million to get to close to 60% reach. And then the last point is ad loads. So ad loads in podcasts, as you know from Giles and Pete, are relatively low still. They're under 10%. Similarly for streaming, digital radio and terrestrial radio are the highest. Terrestrial radio is almost 33%, so the typical terrestrial radio ad load is 20 minutes of commercial time for 40 minutes of content, so 40 minutes of content, 20 minutes of commercial time, that makes up your hour. So getting into it, we're going to look at marketplace conditions, practical applications, podcast best practices, getting the most from a host, video, and then finally international.
All right, so to set the stage, the market is in a very different place from where it was a year ago. We're seeing publishers are much less willing or able to accommodate and to collaborate. While ad load is up year over year, we're seeing existing advertisers grow their budgets and new advertisers come into the market, which means less inventory for all of us and increased rate pressure. We're seeing the highest sellout on our top performing shows, and all of that remnant and fire sales that were abundant even as late as Q1 of this year is less and less. Now, it being a seller's market means that publishers are attempting to get strict with terms and conditions. So this means higher minimums on IOs, removal of first right of refusal, and most concerningly, they are becoming more limited in full show exclusivity, and that's also just in part due to the rise of programmatic and impression-based buying. We're also seeing a rise of co-sales and buying platforms in an attempt to streamline operations. But what that really does is it adds layers of fees, so there needs to be a lot more discernment. In 1 week, I talked to 3 different people, all repping inventory for a network that we're already in contact with. So with all of this, it is requiring a lot more creativity and diligence in negotiations. And so how do we find the margin? Well, it really comes down to 2 things that Neal and I will be covering, and that's maximizing book to dollars and then focusing on expansion and diversification. Now, before we get into what this means for how you should plan and buy your media, I just want to share 2 caveats. The first is that the guidance that we're about to give is much different than the guidance that we've given in the past, and that's just because we're in a very different market. And then the second thing is the next few slides are podcast heavy. While it is a small piece of the pie, podcasting is really at the tip of the spear in audio. So first and foremost, you've got to plan as far in advance as possible, at minimum 2 quarters in advance. If you're planning within quarter, you're getting the leftovers, and a lot of times it means that we've got to do multiple rounds of planning and negotiating, and it pushes the flight date out even further. So if you want to overcome inventory restrictions and really set yourself up to be in a position where securing the best deals in the inventory, plan ahead. Next, and this has never changed, you've got to lock in your core media. But in this market, especially given the decline in new shows that we are seeing, we strongly recommend that you flight out your tests with favorable cancel terms. We also recommend keeping a running list of all the shows or opportunities that you know you want to test and at what rate. And every quarter you can kind of do refreshes to make sure you're keeping that list very long. So when inventory or budget becomes available, you can act quickly. We're seeing inventory become unavailable within hours, and having a longer list of what you want, it's going to give you more leverage in negotiations. Now, in a world where more and more shows are becoming less exclusive, use it to your advantage. Shop the market. Now, typically we see that the closer to the creator you get, the lower the CPMs, but that is not always the case. So it's really important to widen your net and talk to lots of different publishers, and if you can, the creators themselves. And then finally, if you are testing or seeing positive results in a short test, we recommend continuing before that test is over so you can sustain momentum and not risk getting locked out. I know it's tempting to wait till you get those bulletproof results, but if you wait, the inventory might not be there by the time you're ready.
All right, and then we have podcast best performance tactics, and all of these they might be small changes, but they'll add up to a big impact. This comes from Pete's Podscribe Performance Benchmarks report from Q1 2024. If you haven't seen it, it's worth downloading. There's tons of information in there. There's tons of benchmarks that you can use to measure your own campaigns. First one is longer ads work better. So 2-minute ads outperform 60s by almost 30%. So the longer the ad, the better. Doesn't mean that shorter ads can't work. It just means they need to be priced accordingly. If you're paying the same rate for a 60 as a 30, you should be using a 60. Placement matters. So there's higher visitor and conversion rates for earlier ad breaks in the podcast. And not only that, ads earlier in the ad break work better as well. The third point is episodic outperforms impression-based buys. Episodic typically would be considered your baked-in, more faked-in buys. They're almost 2 times better than impression-based buys, which would be more akin to a run-of-network buy. So you need to balance automation with being authentic. You need both. It's a both and, as Dan had mentioned earlier. And then the last point is reach and frequency matters, and who focuses on frequency more than reach? Not that many. Okay. So to maximize total conversions, reach more listeners. So if you want to maximize your total conversions of your campaign, broader the reach. If you want, but frequency matters too, because the more consumers hear an ad, conversions will increase. That frequency level is going to be different for every single advertiser in this room, so it's work that you'll do to find your appropriate frequency level. There's no magic number. But in general, you start with reach, and then you find the frequency sweet spot to drive your conversions against your audience. All right, so, and then produce versus host. So this is going to go into Miranda's section. She'll talk more about the host, getting the most from the host. But 30s are now twice as likely to be used as 60s in podcasting. So 30s are more likely to be announcer-read. They're more likely to be produced ads. 60s are more likely to be host-read ads. Nearly 40% of buys placed are via run of network or programmatic. Most of that is run of network. Programmatic is about 10% of the podcast marketplace currently. Because of the inefficiency of getting the authentic endorsements, programmatic is still a small portion, and it'll continue to be a small portion. I think by 2030, it's only expected to go up to about 20% of overall podcast spend. What we see in our own database, though, is we see a 30 to 40% lower response rate for run-of-network buys based on our analysis of over $20 million worth of activity. So getting the most from the host, getting that authentic endorsement does pay off. Generic ads are flooding the market. They're becoming the norm. So standing out with host-read ads offers greater emotional resonancy, and it really allows you to connect with your listeners.
And with that, how do you get the most from the host? Well, I think it's important to remember when you are buying a host read, you are buying that host's influence over their audience. So it's really important to invest in their education so that they can be the most effective salespeople and create the most impactful message. And that usually requires a first-person endorsement. If you want the reads to be authentic, let the host do it in their own voice. More and more, we're hearing from creators that they want the freedom and the flexibility to personalize and just be able to speak to the connection that they have with the product. And it's really difficult to do when they get 60 seconds or sometimes even longer scripts. And so our recommendation here is to submit talking points with highlighted requirements. And then in the planning and vetting process, that's where you want to be sure to confirm that they will do a personal endorsement. Sometimes they won't. Just know that that should impact your CPM.
What's the number one complaint?
The number one. Well, they want to personalize.
Yep.
They want to get creative, and they feel limited. And we've heard this from several creators just this year alone. Next is to contextualize, right? So don't take a one-size-fits-all approach to creative. A little bit of customization will go a long way, and you can start easy by customizing creative by genre. And then finally, again, in a world where there's less inventory and less new shows coming out, double down on your top performers. You already know that they work, so test out longer length spots, sponsored interviews, and across multiple different platforms. That's a big trend that we're seeing this year.
So embracing video and YouTube. So YouTube, we've already talked a lot about video. We've already talked about YouTube. YouTube is actually the #1 platform now for podcast discovery. So new audiences are discovering podcasts through YouTube. So what does that mean? Really meeting audiences where they are. YouTube increases accessibility. I mean, YouTube is at least 2/3 of all Americans are using YouTube, if not more. So it's just it's such a huge platform. Publishers are investing in YouTube, as James had mentioned earlier. Spotify just recently surpassed 250,000 video podcasts on their platform. And then the last point is integrations allow for higher engagement. And we've seen this. We did an engagement for one of our clients in Critical Role, which saw like 65% better performance than the campaign average just through that integration. The hosts really were allowed to really play with the product and really integrate into the program. Yeah.
All right, so here is a quick and easy checklist when executing against a simulcast or a video buy. First, just because it's a simulcast doesn't mean that video is included. More and more publishers are starting to separate the content, so just make sure you know what you're getting and where it's running. Sometimes it's only on YouTube or just on X or Facebook, and if you can, you want to be sure to use appropriate creative for that audience. Now, with creative, obviously, you're going to submit all of your creative deliverables, but we recommend giving talent more than what they ask in multiple variations so that they can really get creative with the integration. The product should always be on screen or demonstrated on screen, and if the host isn't on the screen, B-roll should be running. Regardless, that lower third, that graphic overlay with the call to action and promo code should always be on. And the link in the description should always be as well. And more publishers are offering the link in a pinned comment where we see higher engagement because anyone that goes to add a comment will have to pass that pinned comment first. Just something to be aware of. You want to differentiate production and media costs. We've caught a couple people trying to blend those together, so just something to be aware of. And then finally, strongly recommend by default just include the guaranteed viewership on the I/O. Most of them will accept it.
Now we're going to talk about the 2 R's, so reach and radio. I think Alexis gave us away a little bit earlier, but we took a look at taking a $10 million budget, this is against 18 plus, and just taking 10% of the budget out from TV, CTV, digital, and adding in a radio and seeing what it would do for reach. Any guesses on like the percentage point gain? 3, 5, 7, 10? It was 7. So 7 percentage points of reach gain against 18 plus equals about 20 million more people reach through that campaign. And that's same budget, small changes to the individual channels, but a big impact. And then the next question you might ask, well, is it good reach? Lumen Research with Dentsu did an extensive study on attentiveness to media channels. Podcast, streaming, radio are all high attention channels, so you're getting an attentive reach through those channels as well. So a really small change, 10% difference, can make a big impact on your plans. Finally, we'll do the international opportunity. So we mentioned there's 500 million listeners of podcasts worldwide. Europe is 40% above the global average time in listening time to terrestrial radio, so don't sleep on terrestrial radio for Europe. And then Spotify alone has 388 ad-supported monthly users worldwide. So that's out of their 615 total. So about 60% of their worldwide total audience is ad-supported, 40% subscription.
All right, so I'm going to cover a couple of additional insights on international and then recommendations. So starting with supply and demand. So something that we're seeing is higher supply than advertiser demand is leading to inventory being sold across multiple different platforms and rep firms. So the same trend that we're seeing in the US, but for a different reason. And our recommendation stays the same, right? So shop your sources, but typically the closer you get to the creator, the publisher, that's where you will see the best pricing. When we look at ad loads, they are growing internationally, but overall, some markets are less than half of what we see in the US. And I just have to say, it's amazing to get on the phone with local salespeople in markets like France and Germany, and to hear them talk about how much they care about preserving the listener experience and protecting the integrity of the content. It's something we very rarely see here. And so with that, there's a big opportunity for advertisers to come in and maximize that minimal ad clutter for high SOV and to partner with the publishers on creative that really blends in well with that content. This next one, pricing, is podcast specific, and it only applies to some markets. We are seeing, when it comes to host-read CPMs, wide disparities by market for various different reasons. But if you are interested in testing into a market like France and Germany, where those CPMs are pretty high, our recommendation is to start with a broad and a general and efficient approach, and then use pixel-level data to gather insights on genre and show level, and use that to dictate where to scale into with endorsements. When it comes to measurement, it's challenging. I had to take a deep breath, right, just before getting into it. It's very challenging, not just due to GDPR, but inexperience. So we get on the phone, we ask them, do you accept a pixel? They have no idea what it is. We have to explain it, why it's important. They've got to go back and check with all these different people. And even when they say yes, it takes like 20 emails back and forth, a couple conversations. But be patient, persist. It's going to get better over time. That's what I tell myself. And then finally, on cultural and economic factors, so, pretty much all of these markets are smaller than the US, and so we're finding that these factors have a lot more weight, and they're very impactful. So it's so important just to be aware of those cultural nuances, even things like media consumption habits, right? Like you might assume, podcasting works in the US. Don't assume that it might work in another country, because in some other countries, even with a younger audience, radio is quite popular and the most trusted media type. So be sure that you are aware of this and integrating it into planning and creative strategies. And then I do just want to say one other thing. I've spent the last, half a year really developing relationships with local publishers all over the world. And it's just remarkable and really inspiring to see how open and willing they are to collaborate and to learn. And so there's such a big opportunity for advertisers to come in, develop best practices that really help shape the future of digital audio within these markets.
Well, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully it was as helpful for you as it seems to have been for the folks in the room. And as always, we want to thank you for joining the Media Roundtable, and special thanks to the sponsors of the Chief Audio Officer Summit who really made the whole thing possible. And that includes Spotify, of course, who hosted us that day, Seeker, which is our partner who has produced the civility score as an answer to your brand safety and suitability concerns. SiriusXM, who is a great participant in making all of this possible. Q-Code, Odyssey, PMM, and many others. Thank you for joining us. And this podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and use your influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, and to build bridges across differences so we can have open-minded, fair-minded discussions about the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer and you're looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by going to oxfordroad.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any feedback, hit us up, info@mediaroundtable.com. Good news, bad news, constructive criticism. We're interested in what you have to say to make this a more valuable podcast for your routine. Don't forget to check out Ad Infinitum. That is Oxford Road's audio creative focused podcast hosted by Stu Redwine, VP of Creative Services. Start at episode 1, and you will learn a lot about how to make your message yield the best results possible in the market based on some of the folks that we've had on there. Thank you to our guest speakers, as well as Bianca, Kyle, Haley, Ezra, Mary Jane, Everett, Neal, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.
Imagine earning a degree that prepares you with real skills for the real world. Capella University's programs teach skills relevant to your career so you can apply what you learn right away. Learn how Capella can make a difference in your life at capella.edu.